Hello. Welcome to Part 7b of the Provider Flex Enrollment Tool video series. This video will cover how to complete the ownership and disclosure section of the application for enrollment with the Nevada Medicaid and Nevada Checkup programs for group applications. Before we go through the ownership and disclosure section, let's review how to identify your entity in the enrollment information section. From enrollment type, you'll select the appropriate option for your entity. Remember that the enrollment type displays available enrollment options based on the NPI you enter. For our scenario, we'll select Group. For the purposes of this training video, let's scroll down to the next field that helps you identify the type of entity you are enrolling as a group. Choose the option that most closely describes the entity that you are enrolling. Notice that there are numerous options from which to choose. Keep in mind that each type of entity could have different requirements to complete, depending on the type. For our scenario, we'll select number 1, Corporation. Remember that you cannot go back and change your options in this section once you have completed it and selected the Lock Answers and Proceed button at the end of it. For more specific information on how to complete the enrollment information section, please refer to Part 3 of the Provider Flex Enrollment Tool video series. Now that we've reviewed how to identify yourself as a group in the enrollment information section, let's pick up in the ownership and disclosure section. The first page in the ownership and disclosure section is an introduction to ownership. Completion of the ownership section is a condition of participation in the Nevada Medicaid program. To find out more about the regulations, you can select the Click Here hyperlink. This page also explains how Medicaid defines terms, like ownership, agent, managing employee, board member, and authorized representative. The introduction also mentions that group enrollment applicants are required to indicate the chain of ownership between direct and indirect owners. A direct owner is someone who has an actual ownership interest in the provider, whereas an indirect owner is someone who has an ownership interest in an organization that owns the provider. For more information regarding direct and indirect owners, please refer to the Provider Flex User Guide by visiting medicaid.nv.gov, or Chapter 100 of the Medicaid Services Manual by visiting the Nevada Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy at dhcfp.nv.gov. Keep in mind that you must enter all owners, whether individuals or parent corporations, who have 5% or more of direct or indirect interest in your entity. You must also include any board members, managing individuals, and/or agents. Note that if a parent corporation is listed, Nevada Medicaid also requires information for any owners, managing individuals, or agents of parent corporations with 5% or more of indirect interest. Select Next to move to the Provider Ownership page. The Provider Ownership page is the second page in the Ownership and Disclosure section. The first thing to notice on this page is that it identifies the provider who is enrolling. Our example shows Lee and Finch Cardiovascular Center as the enrolling provider. Keep in mind that the ownership information should match Medicare enrollment, if applicable. You must add any person or entity on this page that has 5% or more interest in this enrolling entity. Now, select Add a Record to add the first owner to this page. To start, you'll identify the first type of entity that has 5% or more ownership in the provider being enrolled by selecting the Type of Entity dropdown. Notice that you have numerous options from which to choose for a group application, including authorized representative, board member or trustee, corporation, managing employee or agent, and owner. Each option requires you to enter information based on that option. Authorized representatives and managing employees do not typically have a percentage of ownership, but you must add at least one managing employee to the application. For our scenario, we'll start by adding corporation first. Remember that you must complete all required fields with asterisks next to them, so we'll continue by entering the percentage of ownership. For our example, we'll enter 50%. Then, you enter the corporation name, federal tax ID, and its address information. Next, we'll answer whether the entity owns more than 5% of any other business, whether it's healthcare related or not. If you select yes, the system adds a table on the Other Business Interests page that you must also complete once you finish adding all the entity's information to this page. We'll select no in our example. Now, it's time to select the Add button to add the entity's information as owner. When you've added the first entity's information, the application takes you back to the Provider Ownership page. Notice that the entity you added is now showing in a table. If you have more entities to enter, you can select Add a Record to enter the next entity's information. And then selecting the next appropriate option for type of entity. For our scenario, we'll select Owner, which activates the appropriate fields to complete for an owner. Just like when you completed the information for the first entity you entered, you'll complete all the required fields for this entity as well. For our example, we'll enter 25% for the percentage of ownership, and then enter the owner's name and demographic information. Scrolling down, we'll enter the owner's email address. Then, we'll answer whether the entity owns more than 5% of any other business, whether it's healthcare related or not. For our scenario, we'll answer yes. By answering yes, we'll have to complete more information about the other business later. After we've completed all the required fields, it's time to select the Add button to add this entity's information to the application. When you've added the second entity's information, the application takes you back to the provider ownership page. Notice that the table is now showing both entities you have added. To add another entity, you simply repeat this process by selecting the Add a Record button. You can repeat this process as many times as necessary to identify all entities who have ownership in this provider or are connected to this provider, for example another owner and the managing employee. Once you've added all the necessary entities, you would select the Next button to continue the application. The next page in our scenario is the Indirect Ownership Disclosure page. This page displays any time a business or other entity is identified with 5% or more ownership in the provider. Since we identified ABC Medical Incorporated with 50% ownership of our provider, the application has added this page for us to complete. Keep in mind that you must identify every corporation and all board members to have a trail that connects to actual people. So, if a corporation has more than 5% interest in the provider and is owned by another corporation with numerous board members at the top, you must include both corporations and every board member. Select Add a Record to open the Indirect Ownership pop-up and follow the prompts to identify who has ownership in this entity, just like you did when you added records on the provider ownership page. The Indirect Ownership pop-up window displays. You'll first identify the type of entity that has ownership in the corporation we identified as a direct owner. You can select from corporation or owner. Remember that the selection you make here drives what type of information you have to include for the entity. For our example, we'll select owner. Based on selecting owner, you must either choose an existing person from the drop-down or add a new person. Notice that the system pulls in names that have already been associated with this application in case they have indirect ownership through the corporation. For our scenario, we'll select Add New and then enter all the required information for the new person. Next, you enter the percent of ownership. For our scenario, we'll enter 50%, which means we will need to enter other owners after we finish this one to get to the 100% ownership. Then, you'll enter the new person's demographic information. Once you've entered all the required information, select the Add button to go back to the Indirect Ownership Disclosure page. In our example, we have already gone back and added the second owner for ABC Medical Incorporated. Notice that our total ownership now equals 100%. Once you have added all the necessary entities for this page, select the Next button to move to the Other Business Interests section. The Other Business Interests page documents any individuals who have been identified as having ownership in any other businesses outside of the enrolling provider's business. If you answered yes to owning 5% or more of any other business when you added your information as the owner, the Other Business Interests page populates with a table for you to add information about any other pertinent businesses. If you answered no to the question, this page does not include the table and you can skip it. Since we answered yes to the question for Atticus Finch, we must now add his other businesses to the application. Select the Click to Add Additional Businesses link to get started. The Additional Business Interests pop-up window displays. This is where you will document any other businesses this individual owns. You must complete all the required fields. Notice that this window provides you an option to use previous address. If you select this button, you can select from previous addresses you have used in this application. When you finish adding the information, select the Add button to go back to the Other Business Interests page. Notice that Dr. Finch's information for his other business now shows on this page, and you can add as many additional businesses as necessary. Now, you can select the Next button to move to the Disclosure Questions page. You are now ready to complete the Disclosure Questions page, the last page in the Ownership and Disclosure section. You must complete all of these questions, reading each one carefully and answering yes or no honestly to each one. If you answer yes to any of the questions, you may be asked to provide additional information or documentation. Once you have completed all the disclosure questions, you can select the Next button. This finishes the Ownership and Disclosure section. This concludes Part 7b of the Provider Flex Enrollment Tool video series. Should you require further assistance, please contact Gainwell Technologies, the fiscal agent for Nevada Medicaid, by phone or email. The contact center may be reached at 1-877-638-3472. Emailing Nevada Provider Training at gainwelltechnologies.com will connect you with the field service team. Please include your NPI and other pertinent information to be routed to the appropriate representative. Further information related to Nevada Medicaid can be found on the website at medicaid.nv.gov. For information specific to enrollment, please visit the enrollment subpage of the Nevada Medicaid website. Direct links can be found in the description of this video. This video was produced by Gainwell Technologies on behalf of Nevada Medicaid. Thank you for watching.